Now welcome everyone to my channel. I'm your host, Lich Massacre, and today we're gonna chill and relax. I'm here to teach you stuff, and all you need to do is sit back and unwind all that stress. Soon you'll be an expert slaying machine, and all that blood you have on you will... Wait, this is the wrong game? Oh, let's just rewind all of that. Okay, no more silliness. If you haven't already seen my general guide video, I highly recommend you do so. It's pretty rough around the edges, to put it lightly, but it explains all the most important mechanics in just enough detail that you get the gist of it without choking you. Though I definitely wish I put more effort into it. I'm going to be referring to bits of the mechanics here and there which will make little sense otherwise, both in this video and in future character guide videos. Some details in that video are incorrect or outdated, however, so the very first thing I'll do in this video is correct any misinfo that is in that video. It's either due to being rushed, since I did make it in the span of 3 days, or lack of misunderstanding how the system works at the time of making said video. And of course, you can find all of this info on the wiki itself too. I won't go over everything, but I'll cover what I can in this video without turning it into a massive essay. I definitely wanted to get this out sooner than later, but quality comes first and the world deserves to know how Art of Fighting 3 really works by someone taking their time with it rather than jumping to conclusions. A fighting game that, say, took Tekken, Virtua Fighter, and Dead or Alive, and installed them into a single blender, and had a 90s 3D fighting game that was put inside of a 2D fighting game. The first correction is a nitpick on myself more than anything, but I summarize Art of Fighting 3 as 2D Tekken, which still very much applies here, though personally I think it's actually a little closer to Virtua Fighter because of the pursuits and the label strings play. Again, however, it's a nitpick as both 2D Tekken and 2D Virtua Fighter apply here, so it's not truly one or the other, but you can still understand the gist of it. It's more like Tekken because of the juggle combos dealing huge damage, especially with this game's damage modifiers, which I'll get to later. You have to roll your left stick 360 degrees while holding A, B, and C. If you're facing right, you rotate clockwise, and if you're facing left, you rotate counterclockwise. Once you get used to the timing and its rhythm, you'll start Tekking pretty quickly, but it's annoying regardless. I definitely cannot say Tekking works the same as either game though. In the previous video I said you had to rotate the left stick 360 degrees while holding A, B, and C at the same time. Forget all that, that is a complete lie, I was talking out of my ass. Even the Japanese at wiki straight up tells you it's just mashing the left stick around to try and wake up faster. This flub was out of complete misunderstanding over how the game works, and yes, it really is just mashing the left stick around to try and wake up faster. However, there's actually another factor at play here, the type of knockdown it is. Depending on the knockdown, you will actually wake up faster than other knockdowns, and this is a huge reason for the misunderstanding over the game. On the surface, it seems like a non-existent mechanic, but in actuality is something you'll think about in all of your matches. I'll talk more about this later on in the video as well, though it gets pretty freaking complicated, so I'm just warning you right now. Though with the pursuits, in this time you're laying on the ground, the opponent can follow up with a pursuit, an OGG attack for some extra damage. When this hits, it will force you to stand back up, but not everyone's pursuits are the same speed, so it is possible to make a whiff if you recover just in time and can punish your opponent as a result. Your ability to pursue the opponent is also tied to the type of knockdown you get, but again, I'll explain this also in more detail later. Speaking of @wiki post-editing glitch here, there's been a Japanese @wiki for Art of Fighting 3 on the internet for over a decade. I never mentioned it before because A, I've been learning Japanese for a while but I suck at navigating the Japanese internet, B, The majority of it was written in 2007, so I'm taking it with a grain of salt, and C, the vast majority of JP tournament footage is just people picking Weiler, as you can see here.
よし、行きましょう。1P 側玉、2P 側が、いつおじいいですね、A ボタン連打。そう、このゲームは A ボタンで浮かして A ボタンでダメージを稼ぐゲームです。波動拳 A でトルネードアッパー。竜子の伝統のね、このゲージ、気力ゲージですね。体力の下の緑のやつ。これがあると威力が上がるというかね、これがないと威力が下がる。飛び道具が飛ばなくなっちゃったりしますからね。気力を貯める、ボタン押しっぱ、そして相手の行動を食らったりガードしたりすると溜まるんでね、その辺も使ってって感じでしょうか。ガードしてもりもり溜まるんでね、もう貯めなくても大丈夫なぐらい、むしろ気力貯める技がなくてもジャックパンチでコンボがいけるからいいのだみたいな感じでね、今日もワイラー製は元気にやってます。キックキックキック、はい、浮いてうい、お互い行く。トルネード届かない。操作者の今何や、なんで今当たんなかったの？
Well, back to the desperation mechanics. You can only access the super attack when in desperation, which is 20% health or below. Your desperation does not activate at 20% health and lower, but instead 25% health and lower. All 10 characters have 4,096 points of health, as well as 4,096 points of spirit meter, so a fourth of 4,096 would be 1,024. It was originally believed that ultimate KOs activate at 20% health or lower, but in actuality, they activate at 542 points of health and lower. If you go 543 points of health or higher than that, the ultimate KO will not activate no matter what. As well as access to your super attack, which of the 9 characters that have super attacks, 5 of them are unblockable. On the note of desperation and supers, in actuality, there are 7 characters with unblockable supers, not 5 as originally thought. This was the result of one person, me, labbing by myself, so please bear with me and my ignorance at the time. Brody and Sinclair have unblockable supers as well, but they're not as easy to use as they remain stationary. Brody's is definitely easier to use than Sinclair's is though, as he has faster startup and more range. This also applies to trades, which, since they're both counterhits, you will both launch each other, and it's funny to watch, but effectively resets neutral. One other thing to help clarify this note I made about trades activating counterhits for both players does remain true, however it is not a matter of one height or the other. The effect is simply determined by the counter-hit effect of the attack itself, so if the attack doesn't counter-hit launch, then it is instead whatever the other counter-hit effect it provides. The info that I described over the spirit meter in the last video still remains true, but a lot more about it has been uncovered. The shortest taunt will take away 25% meter, while the longest will take away over half. And regarding how taunts interact with meter, the info I described is mostly still true. That is to say, they do take a minimum amount, but it's not a quarter of your opponent's meter when you perform one. The actual minimum spirit lost if the taunt is cancelled as soon as possible, such as by pressing left on the joystick, is 615 points of spirit, so not enough to be a quarter. Though I neglected to mention that both Kasumi and Carmen have taunts exclusive to Robert and Rio that allows them to almost completely deplete their opponent's entire spirit bar. Albeit in Carmen's case, it's only half of each character's spirit meter, but still, that hurts, especially for Robert who relies on his spirit. With every frame that passes by without any special spirit meter charging or blocking attacks or anything of the sort, you recover 1 point of spirit every frame, so 60 points per second without charging any of it. The amount of spirit reduced for each character in a full taunt is also not consistent. I will not list all the exact values, but basically Rio only depletes 967 points of spirit, unlike Robert who depletes 2,266 points of spirit within a full taunt. However, Robert's taunt is also longer than Rio's taunt, so in this regard too, not all characters are equal. You can punch out fireballs except for Rhodey's projectile and how Shokoken, which is the really big fireball that Ryo and Robert can summon. You can, in fact, punch out how Shokoken fireballs. It's just very difficult to time and likely to only work if the attack has a few more active frames than normal, like Jin's foray, or if it collides with another attack, like Rhodey's projectile. And just to get this out of the way, I don't talk about tier lists often because I really don't think it's that interesting for Art of Fighting 3, but while my opinion on the tier list is pretty much the same as it was a few months ago, I wanted to help clarify some further details about it and also some more info that might actually change my personal opinion on it. Out of the 10 characters, I would say 4 of them are absolute. Wyler is undeniably his own tier, wherever that may be. Maybe it's not enough to warrant him being top 1 anymore, but he's still banned for basically contributing nothing to the game of value. And as I probably stated in the last video, there are workarounds dealing with him. His jab is not nearly as powerful as I was making it out to be, albeit it's still incredibly annoying, and he does have some workarounds with some of his more busted stuff, but the most effective one is honestly just picking either Lenny or Kasumi, who both counter pick him pretty bad, I would say. Call me a scrub if you want, but even if Wyler can be beaten with Lenny or Kasumi and other very specific ways of approaching him, having a character who can win almost every match just spamming 5A is extremely unfun to both play and watch, and is not worth killing this game's momentum for. And even if you take 5A away, he still has other advantages and really only needs like 3 other moves at best, like 6AA and Fireball, and works for very little of it, especially the reduced damage he takes. And his Fireball, he really only needs 3 Fireballs and you're dead. The damage this guy deals for so little work is kind of ridiculous. In terms of legal characters, Kasumi is undeniably the god tier of the game. Japan will probably say something different, like Lenny being top 1, which is fine. You know, the local scene is vastly different from the online scene here. It is just what it is, different scenes. Sinclair is easily the worst character in the game with how ungodly slow she is, with very few ways of reliably dealing any damage, despite a touch of death combo, and Wong is bottom 2 otherwise, due to his serious range issues making it difficult for him to whiff punish and just overall lack of combos. While still viable, you will likely struggle getting in and forcing the opponent to open up as Wong. Everyone else in between Kasumi and Wong, I would kind of say they're interchangeable, since a lot of it is theory based in all honesty. This is the kind of game where one small mistake will kill you, and it can happen as early as round start, something that pretty much every one of these characters is capable of doing. If you're really good at reads, game knowledge, and can consistently punish mistakes or pull off hugely damaging combos, the character's tier placement doesn't matter that much. If anything, it's more of a suggestion that the more janky, busted tools and consistency the character has, the higher placed on the tier list they will be. But again, this is theory. As for the actual tier list, I would say my opinion is still the same with the exception that I lower Ryo below Jin. Ryo's frame data is pretty bad. I mean, just look at his wiki page. The only completely safe move he has that doesn't result in him losing his turn is his jab and other small normals like full crouch 2A. Whereas everything else, he's only completely safe if he scores a knockdown. I mean, look at this. Minus 37 on a low 2B on block, but it's minus 14 on hit. There are other examples, but Ryo really bites the bullet in this area compared to other characters. All characters have some amount of problematic frame data, even Kasumi does on a couple moves, but Jin's frame data is overall better and not as reliant on landing hits or hit confirms to keep him safe. Ryo is still quite strong, so I wouldn't say he isn't in the top 3, but he's easier to punish overall, and some characters like Lenny might not have a lot of fuss against him anyways. If we had more Lenny players, I would be compelled to put her in the top 3 as opposed to Ryo. This will probably be the last time I ever talk about tiers with this game though, because in my opinion, it's seriously not that interesting to talk about at this point, when it's basically Kasumi, Goddess, Wyler tier, everyone else in the middle, Wong, viable but problematic, and Sinclair at the bottom of the barrel. Pretty much the entire Art of Fighting Discord and I, while we do not agree who should be placed where in the middle of the tier list, can all very much agree Kasumi is nothing short of top 1 in the game, Wong bottom 2, and Sinclair bottom 1. It's especially damning when, for every bit of tech that's discovered for this game, it is pretty much followed up with Kasumi benefiting from it somehow and inconveniencing everyone else because of it. I'll make detailed character guide videos eventually, but for now, please just check the wiki out. I'm always making sure it's as up to date as it can possibly be when I have the time and energy to do so, and if you look at pages like Kasumi's page, you can see it has gotten some serious glow-ups full of info because my crippling autism does not know any limits. Okay, so now I hopefully fixed up info that was incorrect in the previous video. I still haven't discussed the new mechanics or more advanced nuanced mechanics in play, however, and that's what this video is about. So no more dilly-dallying. Time to crack down even more of the mechanics, starting with possibly the most perplexing of them all, knockdowns. Okay, so here's the deal with knockdowns. There's 4 of them in the game. 5 if you count stagger as a knockdown. You have your normal knockdowns, the quick knockdowns, soft knockdowns, staggers, and stagger knockdowns. And these are their abbreviated forms. Now to go down each one by one. Normal knockdowns are nothing special. If you've played other fighting games before, they're basically the equivalent of hard knockdowns. Once they're on the ground or just about to land, you are able to attack the opponent with a pursuit. You can, in actuality, do a pursuit earlier while they are still airborne, but this results in you whiffing it and thus no air juggle since the game overwrites down forward command normals with the pursuit attack. As long as the pursuit active frames collide while the opponent is in the knockdown state, then you can do a pursuit even before they land without a whiffing, but don't do it extra early. The wiki currently writes every pursuit as 1 active frame, but that's more than likely not true. That's just a placeholder, so please bear that in mind until we get a hitbox viewer. And just to clarify, when I say knockdown state, I'm referring to when the character first touches the ground, as you can see here where their sprite changes. When they start the recovery animation is the moment when you're no longer able to pursue the opponent. I believe a normal knockdown leaves the opponent on the ground for approximately 109 frames with no tech recovery in play, but don't take my word for it, because not all knockdowns are equal. The wiki will eventually have this info, but that's a rough estimate. Kasumi's 66A 4B launcher is not a quick knockdown per se, but it does not last the full 109 frames either, but instead approximately 60 to 70 frames, unlike say Carmen's 5AB, which is the full knockdown length of 109 frames. As for how fast you can recover a knockdown, as humanly possible in theory, labbing frame by frame would suggest you can recover below 40 frames into the knockdown state for every knockdown in the game regardless of where it comes from, but this also involves pushing a new direction for every single frame. This is humanly impossible to do consistently, as you'd have to rotate the left lever 360 degrees every 8 frames, or about 7 to 8 full circles in a second. I have a possible explanation for how tech recovery works, but we'll get there. Quick knockdowns are identical to the normal knockdowns with one exception. They let you recover much faster, sometimes instantly, thus making them impossible to land a pursuit on, or at the very least, near impossible. But here's the weird thing. There are 2 ways of obtaining these enigmatic knockdowns. The first, hit the opponent with a counter hit attack, which as long as it's not quote-unquote too strong of an attack or done with a weaker button such as jab, they will recover fast. Because counter hits launch, this will put them in an airborne state, but only doing a hard attack or a juggle will negate the quick knockdown property. The second method, hit an airborne opponent with a weak attack. So say you anti-air a jumping opponent with 5A, this will result in a quick knockdown, as long as the attack isn't hard, as stated before, such as 5C. I haven't even finished yet, however, because you see, if you do a 5A attack for the quick knockdown, your opponent will recover instantly even without mashing for the tech. But use 5B instead, however, and they take a considerably longer time to recover, although not as much as a normal knockdown. And with these, you can still tech pretty quickly anyways if you mash. Now this too, I don't even get the logic behind it. I mean, I understand the logic of weaker attack equals weaker knockdown, but this comes across as a somewhat absurd design decision by the devs, which while neat is beyond me why it happens at all.
Still, you have to know this stuff, so you know exactly when your opponent will wake up and also save yourself from an accidental pursuit. You have to know your Okizeme for this game. Now, I realize what I just said about frame data and normal knockdowns probably made zero sense to you. That is to say, how teching and recovery works and why you last on the ground for as long as you do when you get knocked down, as opposed to the other types, which are all a set duration no matter what. Let's take Ryo and Carmen for example. Ignoring all animations tied to knockdowns and looking at only the hard numbers of the knockdown state. Ryo's launchers all vary in length. His 3A, when used by itself, results in a knockdown as you would expect. However, if the opponent were to not tech this attack at all, from the first frame they land into the knockdown state until the very last frame where they then begin to recover, Ryo's 3A has a number of less than 50 frames in which the opponent remains on the ground in the knockdown state. Off the top of my head, I believe 48 frames. 6.4 BC and 2.8a, however, results in the full 109 frames of length tied to knockdown state before the opponent recovers. What exactly determines these values, if they're not otherwise predefined, is completely beyond me, but the point being is that these are invisible values tied to attacks that dictate knockdown state length. This, in turn, also means the longer it takes for the opponent to tech recover out of the knockdown state, the higher the frame count, the longer it takes to recover, and thus the more you rotate the left stick around. The absolute fastest anyone can recover in the knockdown state is a maximum of 24 frames if they recover as fast as technically possible. This also means a 24 frame window for you to land a pursuit attack before they recover in time and thus make pursuits whiff, so while possible, it's incredibly difficult. For heavy launchers like Carmen's 5AB, which lasts the full duration of the knockdown state when used by itself, the fastest you can recover is theoretically 35 frames. Speaking of the left stick, while tech recovering for every direction you push in the knockdown state, you eliminate 4 frames of the knockdown state from the invisible tally. Yes, there's an invisible knockdown state value of sorts. You can only tech once you're finally in the knockdown state, as you are incapable of buffering directions ahead of time to reduce from the knockdown state value. Ryo's 3A by itself carries a value of 48 knockdown state frames. If you push one direction within that window before you automatically recover, the knockdown state becomes 44 frames in length instead. Press two directions, this results in a value of 40 for the knockdown state, which keeps stacking as you press more directions. So logically, that would mean that if you are in the knockdown state from a 109 frame knockdown value, if you press a direction 15 times, that would bring the value down to 49 frames. 4 multiplied by 15 is 60, so do the math, and 109 minus 60 equals 49. That's what I would be saying if it weren't for one thing. As you press those directions while tech rolling, even though it reduces the knockdown state value by 4 frames every direction you press at first, this value likely also reduces along with the knockdown state value. So at some point after you press enough directions, the 4 frame reduction turns into 3 frames per direction, then 2 frames, finally down to just 1 frame per direction pressed. Emphasis on likely because the game doesn't follow its own rules between either 3A and 2.8a, but I'll elaborate on that shortly, as I think even that theory is incorrect. Supposedly, Tekken 1 has a similar mechanic in that you have to mash in order to recover faster, but I haven't found any hard evidence of this mechanic existing. Though maybe I'm just an idiot. Another thing to keep in mind is this. Counterhits actually increase these invisible values, therefore making it easier to stack this value for longer knockdown states and thus longer tech recovery requirements. Take Ryo's 3A launcher. If you perform it alone, the knockdown state value is 48 frames. If you land it as a counter hit, however, this results in a knockdown state value of 54 frames. In other words, a 6 frame increase in the knockdown state. As for why Juggle combos result in the longer knockdown durations as opposed to raw attacks, this is because when performing a Juggle combo, the more attacks you do on your opponent while they're still airborne, the more you are adding to the knockdown state value. I have not done enough labbing or extensive labbing to see how big these differences make or what exact values are added to increase the length of the knockdown state during a Juggle, but there's a good reason for that. Say you do Ryo's 3A, it's a 48 frames in the knockdown state. If you add one 5A jab to the attack, the knockdown state value jumps from 48 frames all the way up to 82 frames to the knockdown state value. In other words, 5A alone adds 34 frames to the invisible knockdown state value from the juggle, and if you use 5B instead of 5A, you end up with 108 frames of the knockdown state value, meaning 5B added 60 frames to the value. And keep in mind, the maximum this value can reach is 109, so to say the least, figuring out what the exact number behind each attack is that adds to the knockdown state value is more or less completely unnecessary when the increases are so huge that you may as well already be hitting the maximum value that the opponent can remain in the knockdown state for every juggle combo you do. But let's return to tech recovery. You know, the 4 frames, 3 frames, 2 frames, all that shebang we were talking about. That is, until you lab it further and you look at Rio's 3A even closer, where by pressing a third direction, instead of removing 4 frames as you would expect, it instead does nothing. And the value remains at 40 frames. But then as soon as you press a 4th direction, it brings that value below 30 frames. So I guess that means the game can't even follow its own rules. This is what I mean by elaborate on shortly, quote unquote, and that it only gets more confusing. After writing all this info, I labbed Rio's 28A launcher, and it tallies to a total of 109 knockdown state frames when used by itself, which is the max. But as soon as Carmen presses one direction, then all of a sudden, instead of 4 frames, it reduces the value by 5 frames? But then pressing a second direction doesn't do anything at all to change the value, or even a third direction, or even a 4th direction. And not even a 5th one. Okay, this is getting out of hand. Point is, tech recovery is still a mystery, but that's my theory behind how it works the way it does. Each attack technically has an invisible value tied to it somehow, and that's how the game calculates how long you remain on the ground, and how the frame data works, all that shebang. Yeah, why don't we return to talking about the other knockdowns? Soft knockdowns have a set length to them and cannot be tucked out of in any capacity. Plus, while waking up, you can still be hit by pursuit attacks. Only after a certain frame are you unable to be hit by pursuits anymore. Though note, the exact frame when you can no longer be hit by pursuits is still unknown. Only out of my laziness, this will be added to the wiki at some point, but for now it's roughly around the halfway point of when the character is standing up. Stagger is not an actual knockdown per se, but acts like a stun. When you stagger your opponent, you knock them backwards where, for almost a full second, you can convert into another attack and or into a full juggle combo. Whether you can actually follow up off of it or not in the first place depends on how far away you are from them, what attack you used that resulted in the stagger combo, if you have to deal with corner pushback or not, and the options your character has to take advantage of it, but in most cases you can get something out of it. And worst case scenario, you get some corner carry with it, unless the move leaves you super minus, which, yes, not all staggers equal on frame advantage, unfortunately. Stagger knockdowns are a hybrid of both staggers and soft knockdowns. There's nothing special to say about these otherwise, since if you know how both work, you already know how stagger knockdowns work. The frame data behind them is slightly different, and no matter what, you're always plus after triggering a stagger knockdown simply due to the length of the stagger knockdown animations, but that's it. You'll get a pinch more corner carry off of it as well. The character will enter a stagger first, followed by falling into the soft knockdown state. I will reiterate someday, maybe I'll have fully complete frame data for the knockdowns up on the wiki, but for right now, you gotta work with rough estimates. And that's if I even want to sit through all that labbing just to get exact numbers for stuff that at the end of the day, you probably aren't gonna perform perfectly anyways. And I am completely incapable of debugging games or reading code, so I can't dissect the game for myself to prove 100% with certainty that this is all how it works in its entirety. But with just enough labbing from the making of this video, all the stars aligned to show that this hypothesis is both accurate and consistent across the board, at least for the most part. I realize the frame counting, normal knockdown state info I talked about could have been cleaner or omitted entirely, but it felt necessary to at least try to illustrate the rough idea of how it works in theory. That, and unless someone really debugs the game, that's probably the closest we'll ever get to knowing how it actually works, even with a ton of labbing. You might sometimes notice that when you're in the corner, say you're performing a rush combo and, huh? My combo whiffed a hit. Mid-screen this combo has no issues working at all, so why am I suddenly pushed back away from the corner? So basically, anytime you hit the opponent, you'll notice you push them back a little. In the corner, that force is transferred back to the attacking player instead, thereby pushing them back instead. Considering this is a corner-only mechanic and that rush combos almost always push your character forward, this is likely an infinite combo prevention system, similar to say Revision 5 of Mortal Kombat 1's juggle prevention pushback. However, unlike Mortal Kombat 1, which at most made players perform their juggles differently and failed at preventing huge damage combos, in Art of Fighting 3, I think this mechanic actually does a pretty good job. Now, it's not perfect, of course. SNK could not prevent Ryo's Infinite, and there are a couple touch of death combos in the game, but overall I would say they knew how to prevent brain dead corner Infinite combos without also killing the corner combo creativity, even if the mid-screen combo game is still a bit janky. Well done, SNK. Though keep in mind that even with this mechanic in place, it's still very possible to create accidental corner cross-ups just due to the nature of the game's design and how primarily rush combo attacks push characters forward. While in the long run, this barely affects anything, Player 1 has priority over Player 2 in throws, Rambu supers, and draw games. If both players attempt to throw out the same frame, the throw is given to Player 1, and if two Rambu supers collide with each other, Player 1 also gets the Rambu super. Draw games result in an extra round so that both players can get one more chance to win the match. If this round 2, however, results in a draw, Player 1 wins no matter what, as far as we're aware at least. As for draw games in general, a draw results in both players earning a point no matter what. So if it's a round 1 draw, the match enters the final round, whereas if one player has a round point already and a draw occurs, that same player will win the match. As with Rambu supers, unfortunately this applies even to non-Rambu super type attacks, specifically Rhodey and Sinclair supers. If they trade, Player 1 wins. It doesn't matter who is who, Player 1 wins. If somehow Kasumi trades with her own super, this will instead result in a regular tie round. Her choke Saneate travels right through itself, and Jin, absolutely nothing happens. If you ever feel like your special moves aren't coming out, there's probably a simple reason for it in that you cannot just frame your special moves. In other words, you cannot press the final direction and the button on the same frame, but as long as the button is pressed at least one frame after final direction is pressed, the special move will come out. There's also a weird phenomenon with some attacks like Rhodey's 2B. If you just frame it, it instead comes out as 1B, but delay the button pressed by one frame and it turns into 2B as it should. This also applies to Wong's 2AB turning into 5AB as a just frame input. I won't draw into details too much as it's not complicated, but basically there are damage modifiers in the game. You have the base damage, but from there you have 3 different damage modifiers, which are Airborne bonus, Counter Hit bonus, and Desperation bonus. The Desperation and Counter Hit damage modifiers equate to roughly 20% extra damage, however the Counter Hit bonus technically deals 1 point of extra damage. If the opponent is airborne, aka you do a juggle combo or anti-air them, that equals an airborne bonus of an extra 25% damage boost. You can stack the Desperation bonus with the counter hit and airborne bonuses for roughly 44% damage and 50% more damage respectively. However, you cannot stack counter hit bonuses with airborne bonuses, as the game will override counter hit bonus and instead use the airborne bonus to calculate damage. The spirit meter color affects how much damage a special move does as well, but I'll elaborate on that later. When you're crouching and you press diagonally left or right twice in a row, your character exits the crouch state instantly and performs a regular dash. This isn't terribly useful and you don't really need to learn this to use it in all honesty, but it's another method of escaping to full crouch state as soon as possible, or also having a means of being able to move around right away. You can also leave the full crouch state by just doing like a rush combo attack or a jump or anything of the sort. It has the trait of overriding dash attack inputs when you perform a crouch dash, on top of having very slightly quicker access to crouch normals and down inputs. So when you crouch dash, you'll both not have to worry about dash attacks coming out if you don't want them to, and also you'll be ready to use crouching attacks right away if you need to. It's very minor, but worth noting in the event you find some use out of it. This is the weird part about crouch dashing. It buffers inputs moving forwards but not moving backwards. It's a weird phenomenon that I have an entire write-up on the wiki for, which you can also pause here to read up on. But basically, if you crouch dash forwards, the game will store your inputs from 2-3, and if you press 6 and an attack button before the dash ends, it will buffer a quarter circle forward special attack. This buffer lasts the entire dash, meaning you have a ton of room to buffer this attack. However, if you crouch dash backwards, the game will not buffer your 2-1 inputs for a quarter circle back. After a backwards crouch dash, you still need to input 2-1-4 and an attack button in order for the special attack to come out. Why this happens at all is completely unknown. It's just another weird way the game stores inputs. This really doesn't affect the game's meta, as most quarter circle forward attacks are fireballs or reflector, but you could argue that Kami and Kasumi get a slight advantage from popping a surprise quarter circle forward buffer. As I had mentioned in the last video, your special moves weaken drastically when low on spirit. What I did not explain is the fact that the spirit colors actually affect the damage output of special moves, and to a small extent affects how the special move behaves. The green spirit is 4096 points to 2050 points, which is the standard spirit. When referring to special moves, people almost always are referring to the green spirit variations. Blue spirit, which are 2049 points to 1026 points, reduces the overall damage output of special moves, but they largely function the same. Some exceptions occur, like Jin dealing 3 less hits of his 2-1-4A attack, and Kasumi losing the 2 farthest pillars of her Kasane-ate. The purple spirit, 1025 points or lower, is when the special move loses almost all of its damage and changes drastically, such as the fireball not coming out beyond the palm of the user's fist, or in some cases they cannot perform the attack anymore. There is no direct correlation between the spirit color and the damage percentage it deals. It is different between all special attacks. Some moves, namely counters, will not activate at all when in purple spirit or even blue spirit, while also keeping the damage output unchanged. There is only one exception to all these rules, and that's Ryo's 2-1-4A OTG Pursuit. While it costs spirit to use, you can always use it no matter what, and even in lower spirit colors, it always deals full damage. Besides charging up normally, you can also charge your spirit meter while you are knocked down by holding any button, albeit it is slower. You can also recover spirit by blocking attacks successfully. And it's mentioned before too, without any form of charging your spirit meter, you recover 1 point of spirit every frame, meaning 60 points of spirit every second. Lastly, it should be noted that not all special moves share the same spirit cost either. They have their own values attached to them for that as well. Whenever you jump over a character in a fighting game and swap sides, the other character logically turns around to face the right direction. This isn't rocket science. These animations also activate for something like Kasumi's 4C parry, where she travels past the opponent. In Art of Fighting 3, this turnaround animation lasts for 8 frames, so it's relatively quick. However, what you probably don't know about this little turnaround animation is that it completely locks your controls. What this effectively means is for 8 frames, you are completely defenseless, nor can you move, duck, taunt, do anything of the sort at all unless this animation finishes. When you combine factors like jump recovery and animation length, this doesn't matter as the 8 frame window is short enough that you'll still recover in time. Here's the crazy part though. Albeit very rare, without using Ryo's Jump C, cross-ups still exist in Art of Fighting 3, like with Kasumi's Jump B. Albeit, this attack also has a tiny cross-up hitbox. What this essentially means is for 8 frames, where the player is completely incapable of doing anything, you can time the cross-up to hit during this 8 frame turnaround animation, and thus make the cross-up unblockable. Timing these cross-ups is easier said than done, especially with how the hitboxes are, but the fact that it is possible at all is something to keep in mind. I will not drag this section on for too much longer, but labbing has helped show more specific details for traits like jump length, crouch, animation length, dash speed, etc., etc. I'll drop the images here as they are pretty self-explanatory in what they are detailing. This game actually features a Gatling system too. The benefits from this are almost zero, but it's there. Just simply press A and B or A and C in quick succession to one another, and the 5A jab will cancel right after the attack comes out to chain into either 5B or 5C. There's really no need to use this, but it's worth mentioning. And one other detail with regards to wrong blocking. Almost all wrong blocks in this game activate on overheads, meaning they block low for it to activate. Carmen has what I believe to be the only instance of a non-overhead wrong block. If he uses 5B, it's regular poke, nothing fancy. If they block low, it hits mid, so it'll still block like normal. If, however, Carmen lands 5B on the opponent and they're crouching, but not crouch blocking, instead of functioning like a normal hit, it will result in a knockdown. Any other mechanics I didn't cover, or that may be found in the future, as I will always say, you can just find this stuff on the wiki. Okay, no more rambling over what the mechanics do. I gave some tips in the first video, but that's not doing this game justice. Let me go over how this game is actually played on Fightcade. I'll reiterate to my tips, but I'm going to include more tips and better clarify the ones I originally made, or at least I'll try to better clarify. But as I'm going to say, and you probably already know this, I'll have this info up on the wiki at some point. Number 1. Robert is the easiest character in the game. He'll teach you the fundamentals the easiest while remaining a strong character in his own right and having easy but rewarding juggle combos. He's geared more towards defensive play but is overall the easiest to get a grasp of. Ryo is also easy, but I'd advise against him if you're completely new, only because he's a very flexible character, which adjusting to Art of Fighting 3 may not exactly help teach you how to play at this game's pace when he has a bit of everything. Number 2. Combos are primarily linked based, as they are juggle combos. Not all juggle combos are difficult, of course, but the most damaging ones and any other specific niche combos are very likely to give you trouble, especially if they're character-specific combos. Almost no chains outside of rush combos exist, and depending on who you perform the juggle combo on, it will affect the timing of your combo and potentially even dictate how long it can be due to hitbox size and character weights, affecting what you can and cannot do. In addition to this, you need to keep the corner in mind due to corner pushback. Number 3, in this case too, it doesn't hurt to just learn one-size-fits-all juggle combos if you're struggling to do any of the other juggle combos. Number 4, practice tech rolling. It's going to feel awkward, I get it, but the more consistently you can press several directions to reduce the knockdown state value, the better. You'll be recovering faster and faster before you know it. Number 5, the game rewarding with punishes still remains true as you receive juggle opportunities from it in addition to counter hit bonuses off of your attacks. Do everything you can to take advantage of any and all whiff scenarios that come your way. Number 6, jabs remain a very strong tool. They're mostly plus on block, on hit as well, and allow for anti-airs, combo extensions, get off me tools, serve as strong pokes, block pressure. They're hard to go wrong with. They'll almost always help you in some way, unless you're either Rhodey or Wong, who have more problematic gimped jabs. They're not the only thing that you need to win matches either, unless maybe you're Weiler. But even with Weiler, he has issues dealing with Kasumi and Lenny. Number 7, as always, remember to taunt and manage your meter. This will make a difference in how you play the game and how your opponent can interact in the match. Number 8, wake up low kicks are a huge boon, as the small amount of iframes and shortened hurt boxes you get from them allow you to potentially escape Hogizeme pressure and even interrupt unblockable super attacks when forced into unblockable setups, albeit it is tricky to time the wake up low kicks in these setups. Number 9, I said before that this is not really a footsies game, and to some extent I still agree with that, but I feel it's more accurate to say it's safer to play the footsies game than it is to jump around a lot. With the combination of airborne damage bonuses, juggle combos, any airborne hit resulting in a knockdown no matter how small, jump startups and ladder recoveries, and overall risk of being anti-aired despite huge reward on landing a jump in, it's safer to stay on the ground. I felt it wasn't before since all this info regarding jump frame data wasn't known before, but still, jumping can be very rewarding, just risky. So treat it like any other fighting game and understand your jumps are still a commitment. Number 10. Don't bank too hard on your supers. Some characters like Jin and Rhodey can do it more reliably than other characters can, but overall it isn't terribly difficult for the opponent to rip that chance away from you to use your super just from a few taunts. If you're Kasumi, you especially don't want to, as you get way more mileage out of your other two special moves that you don't really need super, especially when Kasumi's super may just be the worst super in the game. Number 11. This goes without saying, but use your launchers. They're hard to land, but the reward outweighs the risk most of the time. Just be careful to not end up in situations like Carmen's 5AB, whiffing against Kasumi, or otherwise having a launcher blocked by the opponent, or worse, whiffed. Number 12. You do not have to always go for pursuits on Okizeme. The majority of the time you will, but it's still a chance to do some setups or taunt your opponent to deplete some meter or go for an unblockable or whatever other Okizeme's shenanigans. It's also a matter of knowing the different knockdown types and the frame data behind it. Not all pursuits are equal in frame data, some are faster than others, and so you don't want to pursuit at a time when your opponent will wake up right before it lands, leaving you wide open. Usually this isn't an issue, but it's still something to keep in mind so as to not get reckless. Not all pursuits are equal in frame advantage either, so you may want to avoid doing pursuit if only to get a better frame advantage to take a better advantage of Okizeme. Think of it like Shermie's follow-up kick stomp in KOF. You get better frame advantage and more importantly Okizeme if you don't use it, but using it you trade better Okizeme for more damage. The big difference being that you deal way more damage per pursuits in Art of Fighting 3, while also not being as huge of a decision to make, unlike Shermie, where you're basically wanting to choose Okizeme almost all the time, and the damage is really only in certain scenarios where it's the better option. Number 13, I'd personally advise learning frame data when you can, as that's going to make a big difference in being able to differentiate when you can pursuit, what follow-ups you can get, what you can and cannot punish on block, on whiff, so on and so forth. Starting out, you don't need those hard numbers, as a general rule of thumb is you can punish almost anything on block and whiff in the game with some basic pokes. One look at the frame data and stuff like minus 40 something on block is not at all crazy to expect from this game. But when you're dealing with higher level play, knowing those numbers and exactly what you can get out of it is going to make a big difference. In some cases this will even tell you when a move is not worth using in the first place, such as Jin's 28A over using 5AB as pursuit. Number 14, pay particular attention to counter hit effects. Most of the time it just results in a counter hit launcher, but when you get a stagger or a knockdown, or a stagger knockdown, or something of the sort instead, it's going to change how you follow up on the opponent. The especially damning part you need to look at is the frame data of the counter hit effect if there is any. Sometimes you might get worse overall frame advantage on counter hit than if it were to hit normally, or the vice versa for wrong block, where you don't even want the wrong block effect to take place. It's all move specific but will affect your play and shouldn't be brushed off if you want to optimize every scenario to the best of your ability. Number 15, and yes, not even all knockdown animations or restand animations are equal in frame count, but it's a minute difference. Number 16, it's not really a tip, but it's worth reiterating. Everyone is viable even if Kasumi completely crushes the game into right hands. Sinclair is the only one worth arguing she isn't viable, but even then she has a touch of death combo and can still do big damage if she plays her cards right. Now you have a refresher over what the tips are. The game flow itself? Make one mistake and you can die immediately. You can even end entire matches in less than 30 seconds or so. I have recorded proof of a 50-31 set in Art of Fighting 3 that lasted less than 2 hours, something that would likely take 3 to 4 hours in any other fighting game to achieve. This game does get very fast, but the issue is getting past that learning curve because before that, you're almost certainly playing matches really slow. So what exactly do you expect from Art of Fighting 3? Take all the mechanics combined, you have a game where you can deplete your opponent's life bar in a single combo, especially when you factor in damage bonuses, which makes juggle combos very devastating. Even for the worst characters in the game, it only takes one hit for them to steal around. But landing that hit comes with making very hard reads, and being blocked by any attack can prove insurmountably devastating. To reiterate, one hit can kill you by confirming into a juggle combo. Sinclair, Weiler, Mostly, Carmen, Lenny, and Jin or Kasumi can all perform touch of death combos, or at least very close to death. Ryo can also kill from full health, but that is only character specific, and on the characters it doesn't work on, it is difficult to do the combo consistently anyways. Beyond that, juggles will almost always deal half of your life bar minimum in damage. The reasoning for this is, to start a juggle, you either perform a launcher or you'll land a counter hit which also launches depending on the attack. While you juggle the opponent receives 25% extra damage, and if you have Desperation on as well, they receive around 50% more damage too, since the Desperation and Airborne damage bonuses stack. So, especially in Desperation, juggles can hurt immensely. But let's say you don't kill with the juggle. The opponent is knocked down. You can then pursue them to deal extra damage. Nothing complicated about that. Your Okizeme, however, can ruin your opponent's only chance to reverse the round in their favor. If they block low, but you throw out an overhead, almost always this results in a stagger hit, which you can then follow up into another juggle, depending on frame advantage because of the wrong block effect. And after this juggle, the opponent is almost certainly dead by now. So instead of blocking low, they might opt to block high, but this presents its own issues. Blocking high means one thing: lows will hit. Not all lows knock down, of course, but it's still a free poke, especially if they're plus afterwards. If you attempt to attack while the opponent goes for this low, oftentimes this means you get knocked down, meaning you're back in the vortex of being pinned to the ground, and you are then given another pursuit. Some lows can meaty too, so you might press a button without even realizing you're getting knocked down again. So say then, the opponent attacks mid or overhead, then you can parry them with Raz, foresee parry instead, which knocks them down. You only get a pursuit off of it, but it's Okizeme, meaning you can pressure back. It does side switch also, which may not be the most optimal, but usually this isn't too big of an issue. But okay, say you don't want that. You want to hit back safely. You can then wake up low kick instead and punish them, potentially on counter hit too, so it's your turn again. Even then, the opponent can then read this wake up low kick and hop over it and start a counter hit juggle with a jump in and punish your attempt at survival anyways. And above all else, they could just taunt anyways. No meter to spend. Very unfortunate situation to be in. As you can probably infer, this makes it both a game of system mastery and also a matchup knowledge heavy game. While it's not the kind of game you're gonna get specific character interactions from, knowing the matchup as best you can is going to make a huge difference in being able to reap the rewards from every match, compared to a lack of matchup knowledge. This part isn't too hard as there's really only 9 to 10 characters in the game to worry about. The system mastery is going to make it very apparent who has played the game for long enough to know how to capitalize off of every situation. One other thing to note, jump-ins are definitely very rewarding when used right, as you can score huge benefits off of counter hit knockdowns. But this essentially turns the game into a meta of baiting your opponent into a mistake, even if minor, seal the deal and win the round. So yeah, that's a lot of info, and that's really only grazing the surface, but you get the gist. I would do a match breakdown and examine a few matches here and there, but I feel like this video is already long enough and that's going to be really time consuming, so I think I'd just be better off doing that in a separate video and just make this a trilogy of sorts. One final addition to this already huge video, the training mode. I didn't feel it needs its own video since it really isn't that complicated setup, and plus the credit goes to Piantu who coded the Lewis script for Fight Kid Games to have a training mode in first place. All I'm doing is telling you how to set it up and what the shortcuts do and how it benefits Art of Fighting 3. But of course, go check out his channel to see the real deal. Firstly, download the script and extract it to wherever you wish. Download it from this link in the GitHub. Simple enough. Leave the contents of it all intact. When you boot up Fight Kid, click up here onto Lewis Scripting and click New Lewis Script window. A pop-up window will appear. Hit Browse, locate the Lewis script you just unzipped, and specifically click on FB Neo Training Mode Lua to select the training mode. Keep in mind too, this works for several different games on Fight Kid, not just Art of Fighting. Secondly, boot up a 2-player match. It doesn't matter what it is, just pull up the character you want to use and the character you want to fight against. Once you're in a match, go back to the Lewis script pop-up window and hit run. If everything works, voila, you now have a training mode to work with. Sometimes it may not work 100% for some people, and why this is the case is completely beyond me, so all I can tell you is ask help from other people who use the script or Piantu himself. I am not at all an expert on this stuff. Unfortunately, as of this video, there's no way to view hitboxes until someone with debugging knowledge is willing to take the time to create one for the community. However, as you can see, you're able to see both the hardened numbers for health and spirit meter. Press the coin button 4 times or hold it for a while and you can get the pop-up menu. Press it 2 times and you activate the record feature for player 2, which you can end by pressing the coin button. Press it once, you get the play feature to replay the recording you just made. Very nifty stuff. If you have a recording already but want to overwrite it, simply record a new series of buttons and press the coin button again to erase it entirely. As for the pop-up menu, you can use it to set how much health both characters have, the meter, what direction player 2 is holding, the recording menu, and a few other things. This should be self-explanatory enough, so I don't feel I need to say much more than what I already have, but again, give huge shoutouts to Piantu for making this a reality at all. One quick note, try not to accidentally kill either player 1 or player 2. If this happens, the game softlocks because of the damage going below 0, but the health infinitely regenerating forces you to restart the game, as after the death blow, both characters just sit there with the controls locked. Post-editing glitch here again about one detail of the training mode I missed. If you select Rhodey as player 2 for the match, for some reason the Lewis script is bugged and will not function properly for the first round. This is easily fixed by killing off either player 1 or player 2, doesn't matter who, as you can see the health bars don't regenerate any health and the damage values don't show anything either. Move to the next round after someone is knocked out though, and the Lewis script functions like normal again. Maybe this will be fixed in the future, but for now it's just a minor inconvenience to keep in mind. That pretty much wraps up what I wanted to do for this video. I originally intended for this to be a lot longer even, but I decided it was really unnecessary as all I'd really be doing is restating a bunch of numbers or other boring, not terribly important info. That, and since I technically started the script over half a year ago, I somewhat forgot anything else super specific I wanted to cover, but you still know where to look to find it. And lastly, pretty much the entire video comes exclusively from me, so while it ain't too much, special thanks to these 4 people who are probably the closest friends I have in the FGC. I've re-recorded this section like 5 dozen times already. Every single time it just does not sound right, but I'm just gonna go with the flow. November, December, and now in January, these months have been immensely stressful for far too many different reasons, but they've seriously helped me keep my composure one way or another, and really are a huge reason I've been able to keep my head up and continue to contribute to the FGC. I suck at this sort of thing, but seriously, thanks. You mean the world to me, and I love you guys. I genuinely hope we can continue to be friends like this in the future. Thanks for watching, and when I make more Art of Fighting 3 videos, they'll be character guide videos.